Smoke billowed from every house. Buildings collapsed to their foundations. People screamed as they were being pulled from their houses and restrained in the streets. They were lined up by the guards, and King Revik approached with a wicked smile. He drew his blade and cut them in his streets. His blade was only special though. His blade was the only thing that could kill people for good. People would usually return from the dead for a mere 2 weeks, but not now. In a relatively mellow world, people were terrified of him to their codes. The worst part is he didn't even have seemingly a motive other than to kill. He approached a group of children, pulling them from out of school. Among them was a Mirak, a capable young boy with a lot of potential. Revik brought his bloody blade in front of the children and proceeded to rip them up. Mirak flinched, knowing he was certainly dead, and attempting to enjoy his last moments peacefully. But the screaming subsided and he was still there. He felt the blood that had been sprayed all over his face. He looked up and made eye contact with a smiling Revik as he was quickly pulled away. His head was wrapped in a burlap sack and his arms were bound. He was thrown in the back of the cart and forced into slavery under Revik. For many years he did manual labor and did dreadful tasks. He was completely miserable. He had one pocket of light in his life, and that was his trips to the library, where he consumed tons of information. He became great at math, sciences, reasoning, reading, and history. Eventually, he took on the role as the guard for the king. He still lived miserably as a guard, but it was better. He was still considered a slave nonetheless. In his time as a guard, he had to watch the king to do the most despicable of acts. One day he watched the king gut many of his own citizens who had formed a rebel group, but he didn't stop there. He also ordered the execution of their families by association. This angered Mirak. He wanted to go out there and stop Revik, but he knew it would result in his own death. Eventually, he served as a guard for long enough. He became very skilled with a blade. He became so skilled with a blade that he was unmatched in his skill. Throughout all the land, the king grew nervous of his ability, so he called him into his throne room. "We shall have no threat to my kingdom in these walls." "What do you mean?" Your skills have a sword come exceedingly great." "Yes, I know, but I am an asset to the kingdom of anything." Mirak's face became flushed with rage. "I make calls, cut off his hands." At this moment, Mirak became filled with rage. "You shouldn't do this. You'll regret it." "Don't speak to me like that. You are my slave forever, and I'm your king forever." At this point, the guard had restrained him and approached him with a blade. Mirak threw the guards off him and rushed to the king. He grabbed the blade in his hands and wrestled him from it. He was winning as well. As he gained control of the blade, half ripper, he felt a sharp pain breach of his stomach. His moment of success was drained from him and collapsed to the ground. The guards rushed up and restrained him. They pulled his head up to the king. The king grinned and said, "No one wins ever. I'll make you suffer for that." He took the blade and punctured his leg. Mirak went quiet, trying to stop his emotions from giving Revik pleasure, but as he felt his arm rip off, he couldn't stop himself from screaming. He pounced out as the blood sprayed from his body. After many weeks of recovering, he was forced to re-enter the castle as a guard. He had completely submitted to the king at this point. After several years, he remastered the blade. He won't let the lack of an arm stop him. He never showed his skill publicly in the fear of a king. One day, the king gathered him and few other guards to go on a mission. The mission would be to retrieve a blade for the king deep inside of a mountain. The king announced to the group, "The mission is dangerous. Bring me back this blade." In Mirak's mind, he wondered what was so special about this blade and feared what he would do with it. After a couple of years of preparation, the group of skilled fighters was ready to depart, unsure of what the mission held. They rode out to the mountain and entered the ruined entrance. The mountain felt familiar to Mirak oddly. They made it through the dark cobweb tunnel and approached a larger room with an opening. The room was dusty and untouched. It looked like some sort of a meeting room. Thick webs covered the corners of the room, and suddenly the room began to scuttle. Large spirals came flooding out of every nook and cranny. Mirak and the other warriors stood their ground, confident in their ability. They slashed through the horde, and several venomous spirals they were able to bite them anyways. After 20 minutes of ferocious fighting, the group prevailed with only one casualty lost to the venom. At this point, the team split off into 4 different rooms. Mirak entered a dusty storage room and scoured through all the boxes. Finally, as he was searching through a box, he heard a whisper from within it. Mirak. Who said that? Me. He pulled the rags out of the box, unveiling a beautiful, sleek black blade. His face was filled with shock. He recognized this blade from the books in the library. It was the most powerful of the 3 murderous blades. Its name is Soul Eater. It also has the ability to kill people for good, like Heart Ripper, which is also one of the murderous blades. He gripped the blades in his hands. He knew he couldn't let the gang have it. Hey yo, nice, he found it. Mirak jumped, unexpecting of anyone entering the room. The blade whispered to him, kill him. Mirak didn't want him to die, but he knew the rest of the group were fierce loyalists to the king. Mirak spun around and quickly sliced off his head. He marched through the mountain base hunting the rest of the group down. With each one that he brutally murdered, he felt energized. In the background of his mind, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but feeling of euphoria overrode his concern. After it was all over, he got back on his horse and started riding back. He felt sick to his stomach after what he had done. He arrived at the palace with Soul Eater sheathed in palace of his normal blade. Fear and anger began to build in him. He looked down at the stump where his arm was and marched through the palace determined. The blade laughed in his ears. Yes, very, very good. Shut up. He arrived at the throne room door and hesitated for a moment, then bursted in. Revek looked confused for a moment, then drew out the Heart Ripper. Guards rushed towards Mirak, but were no match for his skill. He would quickly impale them, and they would end up at his feet, dead. Soon, it was just him and Revek in the room. Revek made a quick, aggressive strike, but was blocked. The 2 blades continued to clash. I was foolish to leave you with any arms. I told you you'd regret it. Oh! Revek brought down a strike that Mirak almost couldn't defend with one arm. The blades clashed and back and forth. Mirak brought his blade above his head and about to strike down. Revek shielded the oncoming attack. Mirak changed forward and kicked him to the ground. Revek stumbled down, and by the time he could think of getting back up, a blade was through his chest. Mirak felt extremely accomplished. He started down out, Revek bleeding out. He kicked Heart Reaper across the room. He smiled wickedly down at him. Revek giggled and said, "You remind me a lot of myself." Mirak was taken by this. He thought to himself, "I'm nothing like you." But not wanting to hear more, he smashed the blade into his skull. As he turned around, the whole castle of guards had gathered over there. "It's over. No more action needs to be taken," Mirak said. "It's not over by a long shot," said General Black. He grinned. The crowd charged at him, but his blade was as fast as lightning. They all were dead except one guard who ran out to the castle entrance and into the streets. At this point, the euphoria was an all-time high. He marched into the streets and professed, "Revek is finally dead, and you all are free." He looked around and they all looked fearful. "I did it! No more tyranny!" The crowd booed at him. He pictured them all dead and the rage began to build in him. The surviving guard had formed a mob who ran at him. Mirak became vicious. I see how it is. The mob tried everything they could but were brutally defeated. The spectators threw rocks at Mirak and ran. Mirak smiled and chased them down. He outspeeded them easily. He caught up to them and ripped them up. His rage didn't stop there. He killed everyone he saw. He killed people on the streets and in their home. He killed men, women, old, young. They all resisted, but they all died. He walked through the bloody ghost town he had left behind. He walked away from town and towards a hill and that overlooked it. "You have feed me well today," the blade laughed. He ignored it. The euphoria had worn off. He looked upon the city as the sun set. "What have I done?" His heart was sunken in his chest. "I became the very man I came here to kill." He sobbed in his hands. "Why did they defend the king? I was doing them a favor." As he looked upon the sun's beautiful colors in the sky, he spoke to the blade. "You made me do this. I'm not a bad person. I didn't make you do anything." "That's not true. Stop lying to me." "I won't lie to you." He grabbed the blade with his both hands and plunged it into his chest while sobbing. "Fine. I didn't need you. I'll find someone else. I always do. You're just another soul I can meet."